Germany needed something new, something big, so they built something heavier than a battleship turret and called it the Heavy Gustav. This is the largest weapon ever built, bigger than a tank, and capable of firing a 7-ton shell nearly 50 kilometers. They called it Heavy Gustav, the Nazi supercannon that defied imagination. That's a human, that's a tank, and this is Gustav's ammo. 1,350 tons of steel, a 32-meter barrel, and a firing range so vast it could hit a city beyond the horizon. But this wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of madness, a project born from Adolf Hitler's obsession with power and dominance. Unlike many of his wild fantasies, this one was real, and when it fired, it changed how the world viewed warfare. Built not just to destroy, but to intimidate. This is the story of Heavy Gustav, the monster that shouldn't have existed. It begins in 1934. Europe was tense, and Adolf Hitler was preparing for a war that would reshape history. But there was one obstacle that kept him awake at night: the Maginot Line, a colossal wall of French fortresses, bunkers, and artillery built to stop any German invasion. To break through it, Hitler needed something extraordinary, a weapon so powerful it could crush reinforced concrete and steel like paper. So he turned to Krupp, Germany's most famous arms manufacturer. His demand was, build a cannon big enough to destroy the Maginot Line. Engineers at Krupp got to work. Led by Erich Müller, they began designing what would become the largest gun ever created, an 80-centimeter railway cannon capable of firing 7-ton shells over 45 kilometers. It wasn't just a weapon, it was an engineering nightmare. The steel had to be forged in massive sections, then carefully aligned with microscopic precision. Hitler personally approved the project in 1936. The cannon was codenamed Gustav Gerät, meaning Gustav device, after Gustav Krupp, the company's director. It was meant to be secret, known only to the inner circle of the Nazi war machine.
The creation of the Heavy Gustav was not just about size. It was about pushing the limits of what was even possible. The engineers at Krupp had to invent new methods to deal with the gun's sheer scale. Every bolt, every wheel, every rail section had to be custom-made. The entire structure was so massive that it couldn't move on normal train tracks. So they designed a dual-track system, 2 parallel rail lines that could support its 1,350-ton frame. The gun itself was a masterpiece of mechanical precision. Its 32-meter barrel had to be forged from special steel that could withstand extreme pressure and heat. Firing a single round produced a recoil so massive that it shook the ground for hundreds of meters. To load it, cranes had to hoist the 7-ton shells one by one into the chamber. Each shot required careful coordination between hundreds of crew members. Assembly was another nightmare. It took around 3,800 men and more than 3 days to set up the cannon for firing. Trenches had to be dug, tracks reinforced, and the entire site secured before a single shell could be fired. Even then, aiming the gun wasn't simple. It couldn't rotate on its own. Instead, engineers had to curve the railway lines themselves to adjust its direction. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol, a monument to Nazi ambition and perhaps to its eventual overconfidence. By 1942, Heavy Gustav was finally ready for war. Although it was designed to break through the Maginot Line, fate had other plans. Germany had already conquered France by bypassing those fortifications, so the gun's original purpose was obsolete. But Hitler was determined to use it. He needed to prove that the colossal weapon was worth its enormous cost. The opportunity came during the Eastern Front campaign, in the siege of Sevastopol, a heavily fortified Soviet naval base in Crimea. Its underground bunkers, coastal batteries, and ammunition depots were some of the strongest in the world. Traditional artillery couldn't even scratch them. So in June 1942, the German High Command deployed.
Gustav. Transporting it was a massive operation. The gun was disassembled and moved on a 25-car train that stretched over 1.5 kilometers. Once it reached the site, 4,000 men worked for weeks to prepare the firing position, laying new rail lines, building embankments, and securing the area from Soviet bombers. Even then, aiming the gun wasn't simple. It couldn't rotate on its own. Instead, engineers had to curve the railway lines themselves to adjust its direction.
After Sevastopol, the legend of Heavy Gustav spread across both Allied and Axis lines. It had accomplished its purpose, proving that no fortress was truly invincible. But for the German High Command, the victory was bittersweet. The weapon had worked flawlessly, yet its immense size and logistical nightmare made it nearly impossible to use again. Following Sevastopol, Gustav was moved north toward Leningrad, where another siege was underway. The Germans hoped the supergun could shatter Soviet defenses once more, but by the time it was set up, the strategic situation had changed. The siege dragged on, and the Red Army's resistance was fiercer than ever. The order to fire never came. Gustav sat idle, a steel giant surrounded by frozen mud and exhausted soldiers. Then came the retreat. As Germany's fortunes turned, moving the gun became a growing challenge. It took days to disassemble, load, and transport, and with the Allies gaining air superiority, such a slow, exposed operation was a deadly risk. Eventually, Hitler ordered the weapon to be withdrawn to avoid capture. By 1945, with Soviet forces advancing deep into Germany, the end was near. The crew received one final order: destroy Gustav. Using explosives, they blew apart the weapon they had once proudly assembled. What remained were twisted fragments of steel scattered across a forest near Auerbach, relics of an obsession that had gone too far. The Allies later discovered its remains and marveled at its sheer size. Engineers studied it, journalists wrote about it, and historians debated whether it was genius or madness. Heavy Gustav had fired fewer than 50 rounds in combat, yet it became one of the most iconic weapons of the Second World War. In the end, the gun symbolized both the peak of human engineering and the depths of wartime excess. It proved that power without practicality is just vanity, and that even the biggest weapon in history couldn't change the outcome of the war. Today, only fragments of Heavy Gustav remain, rusted steel pieces lying silently in forgotten fields, a haunting reminder of mankind's obsession with power. When historians and engineers look back, they don't just see a weapon, they see a lesson. The Heavy Gustav wasn't just built to destroy walls, it represented a nation's attempt to prove its dominance through sheer scale. In theory, it was a triumph of engineering. No one had ever attempted to create a mobile artillery piece of such enormous power. Its shells could punch through meters of reinforced concrete, its range spanned dozens of kilometers, and its size dwarfed anything built before or since. Yet, in practice, it was a failure. Slow, impractical, and nearly impossible to use effectively on a modern battlefield. The irony of Gustav's story lies in how it mirrored the fate of the regime that created it. Both were built on grand visions, massive resources, and the illusion of invincibility. Both fell under their own weight. The gun that was meant to symbolize victory became a symbol of futility, a monument to the dangers of unchecked ambition. Even today, people remain fascinated by Heavy Gustav. Documentaries, books, and digital reconstructions continue to explore how such a monstrous machine came to be. It stands as both a marvel and a warning, proof that technological brilliance without strategy or humanity leads to ruin. The Heavy Gustav may have been the largest gun ever built, but its true impact lies not in the destruction it caused, but in the story it left behind. A story of ambition, innovation, and the haunting realization that sometimes the biggest weapons make the smallest difference. And so, the Heavy Gustav faded into history, not with a final shot, but with silence. The once mighty cannon that could shatter mountains now rests only in memory and myth. Its story reminds us that greatness built on destruction never lasts, and that true strength lies not in the weapons we forge, but in the lessons we learn.
From the fields of Sevastopol to the quiet forests of Germany, Gustav's shadow still lingers, a symbol of ambition taken to its extreme. It stands as proof that human ingenuity can create wonders and warnings alike. Because, in the end, every war machine meets the same fate: rust, ruin, and remembrance. The Heavy Gustav was built to make history. Instead, it became a story, one that continues to echo through time, reminding us just how heavy the cost of power can be.